Yeah, but I believe it's like this. I will pass the floor to Christian Tegethoff, the managing director, the founder of CT Executive Search. I will not take your time, Christian, please.
Thanks a lot, Oleg. Yeah, and also, of course, thanks a lot to Stefan. So it is really a pleasure to talk to you. Very briefly, of course. Yeah. So the time is ticking. So I think I have 15, maybe 20 minutes now to talk about HR in Russia. I hope you can see my screen. Does it work? Yeah. Yep. Okay. Perfect. We'll now wait. Try to run it. Okay, perfect. So yeah, in the next 15, 20 minutes, I will basically talk about 3 topics. So the first one will be the Russian HR market as such. Of course, assuming that most of you are connected very closely to Russia, know quite a lot about it, but maybe there's 1 or 2 persons in the audience who don't know so much about Russia yet. Second topic will be current trends, so what is going on now in the Russian HR market. And then the third and closing topic will be the results of joint survey, which we did with the CCBLR late October and early November on HR topics. And I think you will find some of the findings quite surprising. Good. Just 1 or 2 words about myself. So I work for CT Executive Search. As Oleg said rightly, we are a company that is doing executive search with a focus on Russia and the CIS countries, but also on Eastern Europe in a broader sense, and also in the so-called emerging markets. So I will not go into detail here, but you can see it basically on the map. But the company is headquartered here in Moscow. This is where I am also most of my time, basically. I'm also calling from Moscow, so you can consider me basically a local person. Talking about HR market Russia. So if you would ask me, Christian, what makes the Russian HR market special if you compare to other countries? I would point at a few figures, basically. So one figure that springs into the eye, you see it on the right-hand side, is the unemployment figure, which is at a 4.6% now as we are speaking. It's maybe a bit surprising that this figure moved hardly also last year when we had the whole impact of the Corona crisis. So you can then ask, what does this figure really show? So in Russia, we can assume that not all people that are actually unemployed report to the state about this status. So we can assume that the real unemployment figure might be higher than this. But if you would ask me, low unemployment is one of the factors in Russia. The second figure that springs into the eye is the very high university rate of more than 30% of the workforce. So this means that nearly 1 in 3 persons in the Russian workforce has a university degree. This is an extremely high figure compared also to other countries. And by a contrast, and Stefan also talked about this, we have a deficit in skilled worker supply. So this is one of the shortcomings, basically, of the Russian education system for a number of reasons, which I cannot, now talk about in detail. The vocational training in Russia is very unpopular, so not many people go for this. So this is a lack in figures, basically, but it's also a lack in quality. So this is what our clients tell us. Especially if it comes to manufacturing. So you will have a hard time, to find ready trained people who are ready to work in a modern plant in Russia. And from a HR perspective, this means it is hard to find people at the first. And then you will have to invest quite a lot of time and money, basically, to make people then fit to work in a modern manufacturing environment. Another factor which is specific for Russia is the big difference in compensation levels. So I will show this in the next slide. So, just as one factor. One positive aspect that speaks for the Russian HR market is the low income taxation. So we are talking about a flat tax of 13% in most cases. So this is really very, attractive if compared to other countries. And also the wage levels due to the depreciation of the ruble compared to the euro, but also to the dollar, makes Russia now quite attractive with regarding to cost of labor, even if you look at the countries like China, for instance. So these are a few basic factors. So I talked about remuneration levels in Russia. So if you take Moscow as a benchmark, you would say Moscow is 100%, then in St. Petersburg, you have roughly a compensation level of 75%, or it's here 77%, and then the rest of Russia is roughly half the level of Moscow. Just to give you a basic understanding. So Moscow by far the most expensive place in Russia, but most of the companies start their activities here basically in Moscow for good reasons. So which I probably don't have to explain here. So if you would ask me, what trends do we have currently on the Russian labor market? So that's, of course, a very broad question, also a very broad topic. So you could probably name many more trends, but I will just talk briefly about 4. So the most important one is Corona, of course. So this is the factor which is not only important here in Russia, but in all countries of the world. But we also must say that many countries are now emerging from this Corona situation. So if we talk about Western Europe, I don't want to say that the situation is back to normal. That's not true. Especially if you now look at Germany, so the figures now rise again. So there's now the 4th wave, and there might be a 5th wave, let's say. But the consequences differ because the vaccination rate in those countries is very high. And for reasons which you probably know much better than I do, I don't fully grasp them. In Russia, it is still very low. And as we are speaking, Corona, of course, is still a factor. So we had this, I would say, pseudo lockdown last week, at least in Moscow. And we can, of course, not be sure that this will be the end of the story. Probably we need to expect that the Corona impact in the Russian HR market will last on also to next year, which makes it extremely tough for companies to plan, basically. So this is one period of uncertainty from this Corona perspective. The second trend that is there, and Stefan mentioned it, he named it as one of the major problems that he's now at this moment facing, is the blue-collar workforce deficit. 2 of the reasons Stefan talked about it quickly. So one, of course, is the lack of migrant workers. So the people who are usually here in Moscow, especially in Austin, St. Petersburg, from Central Asia, are not here, or not as many as there were in pre-pandemic times. And the same is also true for other countries like Belarus and so on. We don't know, when these people will be back here fully. So when this problem will resolved, and we also heard about the increased competition by companies like Yandex Food, which then basically, as we just learned, pay much more than Stefan does. And this is, why Stefan has now this lack of people. No, okay, but being more serious, this is really a major problem that many companies now face at this moment. Then the shift to remote work, this is the 3rd point that you see here, led to a higher, importance of IT solutions. So ERP systems, CRM systems are, of course, more important now. So if you don't see people on a daily basis, you will have to implement, some CRM system, to monitor more closely what the people are doing. And this is, of course, a factor which also then drove the demand for IT specialists last year and also this year. So this is an ongoing trend. And so when we will go back to office, if at all, so we'll talk about that in a minute, we will see. But so this is the 3rd trend that is going on. And the 4th trend, I would say, is basically a long-term trend, which we see in international companies working in Russia, but also in local companies, so that the management styles in the organizations change. So in the good old days, you had one boss in his room, and let's say then his people around him. But when people work remote, you need to be more trustful, and the whole basically style of interaction, with the employees changes. So we see that companies are getting more dynamic these days, which is probably also a good impact basically of the Corona situation. So these are 4 trends. I know that there are many more. I just want to give you some food for thought and also food for the discussion, basically, which we have after our speeches. Maybe just 2 words about what we are doing on a daily basis. So we are in executive search. So we mainly work for Western European companies in Russia. We work only on C-level searches. So we look for CEOs, we look for CFOs, CSOs. And if you would ask me what is the most important requirement that companies look for in their senior staff in Russia, then I would answer the bridge function between the Russian market on the one hand side and the European headquarter on the other side. So we need people who are able to be successful in Russia, so who speak Russian, who know the market, who know the clients, who know how to work in the country, but who at the same time are able to integrate in an international organization and to understand how a Western or how a European company basically ticks. So this is the most important criteria. Of course, you also need the hard skills. You need to know your product and so on. But this is the major soft skill that candidates need to bring. So how do we find these people? So these people are rare. So you usually don't find the right people by job ads. So we apply the so-called headhunting method, which means that we identify and approach potential candidates in the market, and then try to convince them to listen to the offer that our client has to make. Of course, expatriates can be an option if you think about senior roles in Russia. So, I don't want to read out now this whole slide to you, so you can, look through this with one eye yourself. Just want to say that the expat model is basically declining and has been for many years. So back in the 90s, it was quite common, for a European company to send over somebody from the headquarters, to go to Russia, to set up an office, to found a company. This was because back in the 90s, it was impossible to find people in Russia who could, work in an international structure. But of course, over the last 30 years, you have plenty of local talent, you can work with. And then this expatriate model, of course, is on its way back. And it has been for many years, of course, 2014, 2015 was one booster for this. So many people basically left Russia. And the pandemic situation made it also quite painful, for expats to work in Russia. All the back and forth and Sputnik vaccination and QR codes and so on, travel bans make it quite complicated, basically, now to work here. So we can say expatriate model is still there in special contexts, which you can see here on the slide. And there is one, I would say, way of combining sometimes the best of both worlds. This would be the local expats. So this would be people who have moved to Russia for good, who live in Russia, speak Russian, and are also mostly willing to work on the basis of a local employment contract, so that you don't have all these social security issues. So these are people who would basically working like a Russian in Russia. And how to do this, we will learn about this later, as far as I understand. So the work visa and work permit stuff we'll cover later. Good. Then rounding off, I will very briefly then talk about the survey which I mentioned. So the joint survey with the CCBLR. So you see that more than 80%, so 4 in 5 of the respondents of the surveys are based in Russia, which does not mean that all of them are Russian. So a few experts also took part, but most of them are. We had more than 110 respondents when we closed the survey, so quite a good figure, I would say. And as I said, the survey was recently, so it was closed in early November, basically. So if we look at the results now, so the first question we asked, has there been an increase in companies' revenues in comparison with 2020? Maybe a bit surprising that 65% of the people we polled said yes. So the turnover 21 was higher than 2020, which is, I would say, a surprisingly good figure, basically. Now, roughly 20% said it was about the same level, and only, I think, 15% said that the turnovers decreased. So I would say that is a very positive finding of this. The forecast for next year is even better. So we see that nearly 70%, I think it's 68%, of people see a further increase next year. So the trend arrow is really going up now. Roughly 20% say it will be on the same levels. So I would say that's a very strong figures. So and only 11%, if I'm not mistaken, say it will be less. So the outlook for next year, for reasons which we didn't ask for now in this survey, seems to be quite optimistic. This, of course, also means that the companies will be hiring. So 55% of the companies said, yes, we will increase headcount. So we will bring new people on the board. Less than 40% no, and just a few companies are going to decrease headcounts next year. So this is the planning. So, or let's say the expectation. It's, of course, not a plan written in stone. As I said, planning Russia now at this moment, as in most countries, is not so easy. Corona impact next year will be still high. So more than 60% of respondents say yes, Corona will be with us still next year. Yeah, so nobody really expects that this will change soon. I think that's clear. And this also, speaks into the same direction. Roughly 68% of the companies at the moment have hybrid work, so a combination of remote and presence work. And 65% of the companies don't expect that all of the employees will be back in the office next year. So remote work is something which is going to stay, for the foreseeable future. And this is the expectation of most people. And then rounding off, so because we also talked about salaries, more than 60% of the polled companies will increase salaries according to the official inflation rate, which is now at the moment slightly more than 7%. So this would be the expectation. A bit more than 25% expect that the levels will be the same, so there will be no increase, which of course de facto means that the people will earn less. So that's that we also need to understand, and also only roughly 5% expect significant increases in compensation next year. Yeah, so this was my tour de force to the HR topic. So I hope that I was able to touch a few interesting topics, and with these more or less positive results of our survey, I will hand the word then back to Oleg. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Christian. It was very short but very complete in your presentation. Thank you very much. And it's true that we have also some requests